Dear students, the last week we've discussed the duplication of the master cast for movable butcher denture to construct a refractory cast. Now, after achieving the refractory cast, we need to construct the framework for movable butcher denture, or to wax up the framework of removable butcher denture. So the lecture for this week will discuss all the steps that we need and the information related to waxing up the removable partial denture. The wax pattern, it's waxing the removable partial denture framework, which should be accurately shaped and duplicate the anatomic landmarks of the partial denture. Generally, the requirement for wax pattern material are the wax pattern must be conforming to the exact size, shape, contour of the appliance which it is being constructed. And of course, no dimensional change should take place in the wax pattern. The material available in the form of wax and plastic, and both of them can be applied or wax up these materials or these designs ready, whether they are ready-made or in containers, to mold it and to build or to create our design. We have the methods that are using to making a wax pattern. Generally, we have two types. First of all, the freehand waxing method wax. The freehand waxing method, it's used by flushing the wax on the cast, and it is made by adding melting wax on the cast with warm spatula until the desired thickness and shape are established. Of course, after we receiving the refractory cast, using a wax pencil to redesign again our design on the framework to make sure that this the same design that we created in the master cast before the duplication to create a refractory cast. And then, according to the lines that we have, using a freehand waxing by melting the wax in a pot, special melting pot in appropriate temperature according to the type of the wax that we are using, because the wax that we are using for the major connector, the melting point is different than that for the occlusal race and the major and minor connector, and so on. So this is a freehand method. This requires much more skill in making the wax pattern on the cast similar to the outline, and any error that may be occur will appear in the cast. So actually, the professional and skillful technician can achieve this freehand waxing method easily. Or probably as a dental technician, you need to train for several times to have such a skill. Now, the other method, we have the ready-made wax pattern, and this available in the form of wax and plastic ready-mades. So the plastic form applied to the cast and seal in place with adhesive liquid. So we have, for example, the refractory cast and then spraying adhesive liquid on the area that we would like, for example, to attach the clasp or the major connector or the saddle area minor connector, or whatever the parts are. This method preferred because make fabrication more accurate, faster, and make finishing such simple performed clasp pattern. Assure that clasp will have the proper taper and resiliency. So the ready-made has the ready-made design is already manufactured with details the only thing that the technician may need to handle this piece of ready-made plastic foam glass, for example, or sheet, gently, and after spraying the adhesive liquid to the surface, which is previously dipped in beeswax, and this will make easy to adapt all the parts gently without any distortion to the design, the plastic design, or managing of such a part. In addition, we have also the ready-made pattern, which is available in form of wax or plastic discs, and this is actually for cut-come production method. So nowadays, we don't need to duplicate or making a refractory cast or waxing up the removal washer dasher. Just we need the prepared master cast and scanned using computer aided design with a 3D shape scanner, for example, and capturing this digital form of the cast in a form to create our removable washer denture design using different icons regarding the major, minor connector, the type of the clasp, the direction of the clasp, and so on. So this is act as a ready-made wax pattern. This can be milled or additive. We can build it as a 3D printing, and this is depend on the type of the material to be, whether it is plastic or wax to be milled or to be added as a wax pattern, and then we can cast it in different way, mostly with the cut production methods. We have also can create a removable washer denture directly made from cobalt, chromium, or titanium, and this is actually highly cost machines to be used to create a removable partial framework with such a technique. Now, the method, this method, for example, of ready-made wax pattern, actually makes the procedure more easily and more accurate. But it requires what? First of all, correct selection of the pattern. So in the maxilla, the major connector different than that in the mandible. Careful handling of the pattern. Do not avoid tearing or stretching the parts. This will affect the dimension of, for example, the cross section of the class, whether it is for closal approach or gingival approach. Cutting the pattern according to the size needed. That means do not cut pattern for major connector, for example, for full arch. If we are needed for anterior posterior palatal, then as in this part. Actually, also the saddle area, the extent of the saddle area from both sides, and so the pattern should be cut in the size that needed. Do not overcutting the pattern or the plastic ready-made pattern to undesirable parts. Regarding, for example, this area, this is the saddle area should be over the crest and leaving this area to attaching for the acrylic later on after casting the design. We also should be firmly adapted to the refractory cast, since we dipped the refractory cast in beeswax, and also using adhesive liquid sprayed before adapting the pattern. It's one of the important things for the technician to remember to adapt all the parts firmly and gently from one side to another side. Do not stretch it, do not over pressure it, otherwise this will deform the dimension of the the dimension of the wax pattern. Generally, the material that and the instrument that we need to fabricate removable blusher denture, we need lay wax, plastic patterns, Bunsen burner and Hanno torch, gauge wax shaped or for brewing, suitable wax carvers, tacky liquid, and applicator bottle. All of these were needed actually to be used. Also, the investment material we needed as well. Using the investment cast, tacky liquid should be used to tissue surface on cast to form adhesive surface for the pattern. Waxing is nothing but fabricating the wax pattern for the framework. Now, commercially available wax or plastic pattern can be used to fabricate the framework pattern. The wax forms for cobalt chromium alloy framework should be easily waxed heavier, thicker than those for gold framework. Now, commercially wax and plastic pattern are available in a wide variety of shape and gauge thickness. So the commonly used pattern gauge include, for example, full paletal. The gauge should be 26 gauge, and paletal strap 22 gauge. For example, the horseshoe and double paletal bar. Probably the lingual plate, the portion of the pellet extending over the teeth is fabricated using a gauge 6 pattern, whereas the lower border is made half pear shape because of the floor of the mouth and the attaching and the movement of the tongue to be easily moved over the pear shape, with the wide apex toward the toward the tongue and the narrow apex toward the teeth. And the shape by they're reinforcing this 6 gauge as well with 28 gauge pattern over it. The superior margin are made knife edge while adapting over the teeth on the refractory cast. Also the lingual bar we should put in our minds. The lingual bar also the gauge 6 at the upper border. The lower border is made half pear shape as well, adapting into 28 gauge pattern over it. The gauge pattern wax sheet are also available with adhesive packs and various colors: green, soft, non-adhesive, yellow, soft, adhesive, and pink hard. This creativity with the colors from different manufacturers actually is essential to make the dental technician aware about the way that we are using the wax patterns. Generally, we have procedure to be informed before starting waxing the removable blusher denture framework. First of all, a sheet of the pattern material, plastic or wax, is roughly cut according to the shape of the outline of the major connector and gently adapted over the refractory cast. And then we can cut the excess of it. Do not shortening the design to distribute the or to tear the material itself. So it is essential to put in your minds what the design is, so what the dimension for the major connector, for example, will be. So roughly cut around the shape. Do not shortening it or over exceed the cutting piece. If the major connector is actually designed to be external over the lingual surface of the teeth, the pattern should be extended on to the lingual surface of the teeth, stopping just short of the cervical edge line of the tooth. Now, blue casting wax poured over the edge to seal it too. So we're using the blue wax to seal all the design together, uniting the components like the major with the minor. So basically applying the clasps, the major connector, the closures, and then using the blue wax to uniting all the components. The bead groove created during wax up should be filled with the blue wax. The bead groove is for the food dump, of course. A thin layer of wax is then applied to cover the entire contour of the adapted pattern. The wax is finished to a thin edge in the area where it's contact the tooth and is slightly rounded at the border. Do not leave a sharp wax pattern, otherwise this will be created in a metal and this will be hard to be finished, and even probably we have problems with the casting, lead to fracture the investment material. So bubbling all the edges and finishing it to smooth. A half round wax pattern of 12 to 14 gauge may be used to adapt the outer stress around the edentulous ridge, and this probably the shoulder. Depending on the type of minor connectors, either cross truss may be used to make a mesh or nail beads created on the saddle area, and this is depend on the type of the saddle, whether in the maxillary or the mandibular, long or short span, and the type of the artificial denture teeth. Finally, the pattern should be polished in term of polishing it with the using the burnished instrument or ash number 12 or 11 to smoothen or bevel the surface. For the mandibular partial denture, starting for example the designing of, we will discuss the designing in mandibular partial denture and maxillary partial denture. For mandibular partial denture, first step is to outline the framework on the investment cast, the surface of the cast. Use the master cast guide, of course, by soft pencil to avoid marring. Avoid using graphite pencil. There are special pencils made of wax. This used to draw the design on the refractory cast, and there are different colors, red and blue and black. All of these do not affect our waxing and then later on the burnout procedure. Otherwise, if you use the graphite pencil, there will be a debris within the wax, and this affect the casting later on. So the soft pencil will be used with a wax soft pencil to draw the design, and then starting to adapting or using the special designs which is represented the type of the clasps, the major connector, and to be waxed up. Now the lingual bar, for example, pattern is removed from the card with a tacky motion. The lingual bar, for example, used with the tacky motion, it's a quick motion to avoid stretching of the lingual bar, for example, to prevent stretching the pattern. Then a tacky liquid is applied with a small brush or instrument to the tissue surface of the pattern that I would like to attach this part on it. Do not over tacky liquid or the cast. Only the area that you would like to attach the, for example, the lingual bar major connector. Now this liquid forms an adhesive surface on the pattern. The pattern then is placed in a position that the external finish line just distal to the abutment tooth. As I said, it's a beer shape. So the finish line distal to the abutment tooth. The external finish line on the plastic pattern is placed near or over the internal finish line on the refractory cast. After the finish line has been pressed to place, the lingual bar area is placed using the line drawn on the cast as a guide, of course, because we are following our design. Be sure that the lingual bar is a minimum of 2 millimeter from the margin. So the lingual bar is a minimum of 2 millimeter from the marginal gingiva of all the teeth, including the abutments, of course. And this is for healthy purpose or healthy design. Do not touch the lingual bar close to the marginal gingiva of the natural abutment teeth. This will affect the accumulation of food and then showing problems in terms of functional removed posture denture. Now the plastic retention is then pressed to place with the center bar just lingual to the crest of the ridge. The plastic retention should always extend over the crest of the ridge to prevent midline a fracture of the denture base, of course. Now, a portion of a lingual bar pattern is placed on the right side of the cast in a similar manner. The clasp pattern are next placed, so generally the major connector will be the first to apply in the lower in the mandibular wax up form of posture denture framework. Then the clasp pattern. Why? Because if you use the clasp pattern first and then adapt the maybe with handling the refractory cast and using your lacron or an instrument to attach these components will affect the clasp and the cross section of this. So the clasp pattern are then placed into the position. They are first coated with the tacky liquid on the tissue surface. And this time, with the clasp, we are using the tacky liquid in the inner surface of the clasp rather than spray it on the tooth. This to make sure that when we are adapting the clasp, first of all, the tip of the clasp on the desirable undercut that we would need it, and then slightly the clasp arm is placed in position. The excess clasp pattern is removed with a warm spatula, of course, or any instrument, which this is from the other end away from the retentive part. The clasp pattern have all been placed on the investment cast. The clasp finish line between the abutment on the right side is produced by freehand and all lay wax. In this, when the technician position the clasp, now the closer rest be placed using blue lay wax in the area, and it is carved to proper contour. The finish line is placed with a sharp instrument. The finish line for the closer rest and the union of the closer rest with the clasp. Otherwise, there is a debris of this wax, probably create the metal later on, and this will be difficult to control by the finishing. Beside that, the sealing with the surface probably will be affected. The finish line and plastic rotation have been completed on the right side. Note the attachment of the bar clasp to the plastic on the side. Now the clasp pattern are joined and the closer rests are formed with the blue lay wax. With experience, you will learn that the correct temperature at which the wax must be used. If the wax is too hot, it will flow over the surface of the cast, of course. When this occurs, the excess must be removed without marrying the cast, without scratching the cast. The areas between the lingual bar patterns are joined with the blue lay wax. Note that the sticky of inlay wax has been attached to the tongue blade. This method keeps the inlay wax at hand and keep it clean, of course. The joint between the clasp arm on the reverse action clasp are joined similarly if we have a reverse action clasp. Okay, note that the reverse action clasp has been formed by using two separate clasp patterns. It is impossible to make this clasp properly by attempting to bend one clasp pattern on itself. So the direction of it, you should use different direction from the ready-made wax pattern or plastic pattern. The complete wax pattern is flamed lightly with Hanno torch to smooth the wax. This flaming is light and fleeting. Otherwise, the surface of the plastic pattern will melt. Excessive flaming also cause the inlay wax to flow over the surface of the cast, and this will actually make everything mess with the cast. After flaming, finishing lines made in inlay wax may need to be redefined using a sharp instrument. The completed mandibular partial denture pattern, it may be necessary to seal the edges of the lingual bar pattern to the cast. This is particularly true in the area of the internal finish line. We have internal and external finish line. We discussed that previously. According to the type of the finish line that we have. The the same procedure will be mostly with the followed with the maxillary partial denture. And of course, the first step is to draw the design on the design. Then, for example, 18 gauge round wax placed in the bead line. For the foodum, 18 gauge round wax is sealed to the cast with the warm spatula. The wax extended above the surface of the cast is removed. So we don't have foodum with the mandibular partial denture framework design, but we have with the maxillary. So we should put in our mind to use the 18 gauge to fill to fill the bead lines that represent the foodum. It depends whether we are have actually anterior posterior palatal shrub or bore plate for the posterior palatal area. One method of making a palatal bar pattern is to use gauge wax. Do stretch the wax or there will be a thin area in the bar. If you stretch the wax, you will have a thin area, and this will affect the design. This will be actually the framework will be not uniform well in terms of the texture of the major connector. Now, to avoid stretching, a wedge is removed from the wax so that it may be adapted to a concave surface. So mostly using a wedge shape to be adapted. Do not use a quadrant or just a wedge shape. So this will easily make the adaptation for the major connector easily with the maxillary partial denture. The wax is pressed firmly but gently, with the firmly and but gently. Firmly in terms of do not leave hollows between the major connector and the adapted surface, and gently do not stretch it to place and the excess is removed then. The anterior piece of gauge wax is adapted to the right side to complete the palatal bar. Of course, the maxillary major connector should be within the thickness of 24 gauge wax or its equivalent, and this is depend on also the type of the material that we are using, whether cobalt chromium, nickel chromium, gold alloy. One method to ensure that there are no thin spots is to make the maxillary major connector of two thickness of 30 gauge wax, which is the equivalent of 24 gauge, by adapting the two layers of 30 gauge wax separately. The danger of this thin area is minimized, but still these need to skillful dental technician to adapt the two layers without any air bubble between them and gently. This shows the second piece of being adapted, after which it is cut back to the outline of the first piece. The edges are then sealed to the cast. Now, the palatal bar made of two thickness of 30 gauge wax is complete. An alternate method of making a flat maxillary major connector is to use a plastic pattern which comes on sheet foam. This material has a bubble shape which make the resulting casting feel natural. That means the texture of the outer surface different than the inner surface. The inner surface flat to be attached to the tissue surface, but the natural texture of it different on the palatal side. And it's also easier to polish. This material is adapted in much the same manner as the wax, except that the area um, to be covered on typecast is first coated with liquid and is applied to the cast tacky liquid. This is the only instance when tacky liquid were used. Now the excess pattern material is removed with a warm spatula. If two pieces need to be joined, a little lay wax is flowed in the junction to make sure that the edge is well sealed. Now the class patterns are adapted the same way on the mandibular pattern. The tacky liquid is painted on the flat side of the pattern and the tip is positioned. Note that this clasp is being placed directly against the gingiva. This is often done on maxillary partial denture for aesthetic reason, of course. The teeth has the proper contour and undercut. The clasp pattern is then adapted around the tooth as indicated by the design. And the excess clasp pattern is removed with a warm spatula, of course. All of the clasp patterns have been placed and a finish line pattern is being adapted. The particular patterns has an external finish line and plastic retention loop. The external finishing line is placed near or over the internal finish line on the investment cast. The internal finishing line is the line represented by the bead line and using the gauge wax 18 to seal this. And the external finish line represented by the shoulder, the demarcation in the external surface or the polishing surface, the demarcation between the major connector and the starting of the free saddle area. Okay, now the opposing teeth determine the position of the external finish line, of course, which should be placed so that a minimum amount of denture base resin is needed on lingual aspect of the teeth. The plastic retention loops should extend over the crest of the ridge, and this also depends on the type of the denture base, artificial denture teeth, and related to the denture base material later on, which is the polymethyl methacrylate. Now, all of the plastic patterns are in position. The closer rests are filled with inlay wax, and the junction between the patterns are filled to united again. Now, the palatal bar pattern, for example, is checked to be sure that it is sealed. It is generally best to flow some wax around the edges. The finish line pattern on the patient left side has been improved by the addition of the semi-lay wax. On the right side, the exterior finishing line should run down the minor connector when actually circumferential clasps are used. Now the pattern is lightly flamed to smooth the wax, and the maxillary pattern then is completed. All this procedure within the maxillary mandible, we should put in our minds that using the major connector first of all, the saddle area, then the clasp, and occlusal or incisal rest, and then you reunited using the blue lay wax. We have many points should be taken into consideration during waxing the design. First of all, we should put in our mind in the minor connector. The minor connector should be made perpendicular to the major connector. Not excessive bulk cause interference with the tongue. So uniformly create the minor connector to flow from to connecting the major connector to the closer wrist or to the proximal plate. The saddle area should be extended on buccal and lingual slopes forms in a ladder mesh nail shape. This will give us enough space, for example, later on for the polymethyl methacrylate to be attached mechanically to it and give a strength for the restoration as well. The clasps should be extend on buccal and lingual. The clasp should be avoid any sharp corner in the wax because this is difficult step in requiring a skill. Size, the shape depend on the contour and the size of the tooth. So avoiding any sharp edges. Look here, all of the edges round with the closal approach clasp here with the also the retentive tip there. So in term also of RBI system, so all the edges should be round and avoid sharpness. This probably will eliminate the probability of incomplete casting during casting procedure, and later on, if it's completely casted, probably the sharp edges act as a weakening effect, which lead later on to fracture the clasp. Now, the major connector should be added to the wax according to the type of major connector, of course. And it should be not excessive and bulk, and this is depend also on the type of the residual rate, whether it is mild resorption, heavily resorbed, type of denture teeth. With the acrylic we are using different type of the mesh and with the porcelain teeth as well. After completing the design should be sealed on the investment cast to prevent seeping of investment under the design. The seal saddle area, inner and outer edges sealed by the heat spatula without add wax. Outer edges of the finishing line may be flamed, but the inner side not flamed because this can easily destroyed by heat. But generally, if the technician well professional, actually during the process of reuniting, he will finish all these steps to make sure that the design is ready to be later on sprued, preparing for the casting. What I need from you, dear students, to prepare this quiz for next week: what are the requirements for ready-made wax pattern or for removable bachelor denture framework design? Until that time, be safe. I'm looking forward to discuss the next step regarding removable bachelor denture framework. Thank you.